They just wanted to touch a beautiful thing, to take a couple of photos against the backdrop of picturesque Canadian mountains and clear icy rivers. But in Banff National Park, even familiar places hold something sinister. In a matter of seconds, an ordinary hike turns into an unexplained disappearance that even the most extensive searches can't solve. Today you are waiting for 3 mysterious stories in which a simple passion for nature turned into tragedy. How do people disappear without a trace in the mountains? Why are some bodies found where no one goes? And what do quiet Canadian forests and rushing rivers hide? The answers to these questions may be much scarier than they first appear. In July 2023, a tragic incident occurred in Banff National Park that, despite extensive searches, has never been definitively resolved. According to the Calgary Herald, a 29-year-old hiker from Calgary went missing after being swept into the rushing current of a local river. The case is still being discussed on social media and among seasoned travelers as an example that nature is capable of delivering the cruelest surprises, even where one considers oneself confident. According to open sources, Gagandeep Singh Khalsa and 2 of his friends traveled to Banff Park in a bid to enjoy nature, beautiful views, and take some spectacular shots against the backdrop of the Canadian mountains. Their choice fell on the popular Glacier Lake Trail that leads to one of the region's scenic corners. It wasn't the first time the friends had been to Canada's national parks, and this kind of hike wasn't unique to them. The travelers reached a viewpoint near a footbridge over the North Saskatchewan River. Here they decided to stop to take photos. This is the location that attracts tourists because of the unusual combination of mountain landscape, forest colors, and turquoise river. However, the beauty of the scenery has a danger. The river, fed by glacial waters, is actually much more rapid and cold than it may seem at first glance. According to eyewitnesses and reports from search and rescue teams, on Saturday night a group of hikers, including Khalsa, decided to go to the very edge of the bank to get some good shots of the rushing water. Allegedly, Gagandeep Singh Khalsa slipped on a wet rock or lost his balance by stepping too close to the cliff and ended up falling into the river. A friend saw him fall and then he was quickly swept up by the current. Local residents and rescuers emphasize that such stories are not uncommon in mountain rivers. A person is caught in the icy water by the powerful current before he realizes it. The North Saskatchewan here, although it appears to be a relatively safe mountain river to the untrained eye, is in fact a raging torrent with many underwater rocks and precipices. Several witnesses rushed to help. Someone threw ropes, but a sharp splash was already carrying the man downstream. In seconds he was out of sight, hidden by the foam and the river's curves. News of the incident reached the nearest ranger station immediately. Within an hour, the first rescue team arrived on the scene to assess the situation and begin the search. Judging by the official report, the operation started immediately. People combed the shores, trying to catch any detail, whether it was a backpack, shoes, a fragment of clothing. However, even on hot trails, there were no results. The very next day, large forces joined the investigation: helicopters, patrols with drones, cynologists with service dogs. It quickly became clear that the river goes into a narrow canyon, where it is extremely difficult to find a person. The water there is turbulent. Depths can change dramatically. The water temperature is in the neighborhood of 39, 42.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which in case of a fall without a wetsuit leaves almost no chance of survival. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with the Banff National Park Authority, set up a field headquarters near the start of the Glacier Lake Trail. Information from locals, volunteers, and hikers who may have noticed signs of the missing man's presence flocked there. The office summary noted that searchers circled a significant area by helicopter, including difficult-to-traverse rocky areas. The case has been particularly loud in Calgary's Sikh community, where Gagandeep Singh Khalsa was from. According to local media, Khalsa was involved in volunteer projects, supporting youth and helping organize cultural events in the city. His disappearance became a topic of discussion at the local temple, Gurdwara, where acquaintances and friends prayed every day for his safety, hoping that he had somehow miraculously survived and made it out. "He was an example of kindness and vitality to many," said one of the elders of the community. "He loved the mountains, but always treated them with awe. We can't believe he could have been lost like this." People have been raising money to fund additional searches, writing appeals to local authorities. But sadly, even the widest response couldn't help where nature took over. For days, a clear pattern emerged. If the missing man had snagged on a rock somewhere or come ashore in a state of shock, he would most likely have been found by volunteers or rangers by now. There are no traces, no clues, no evidence that the man is alive. In fact, none of the hikers who made the trek downstream reported seeing or finding traces of Khalsa, scraps of clothing, wet footprints, and the like. The organizers of the search were increasingly inclined to the sad conclusion that the rushing river could have carried the body much farther. Moreover, in some places, the river goes into limestone crevices, forming peculiar underground currents, and even if the body is trapped somewhere underwater, it is almost impossible to find it in winter or at the current water level. The missing man's family, including his parents and siblings, remained in constant contact with police. According to a statement from Canadian police, everyone was warned that the hope of finding the man alive was melting away by the day. Relatives prayed, visited the scene, consulted with survival experts. But alas, the bitter truth is simple. Falling into an icy mountain river with a swift current is usually fatal. One of the family members who came from abroad said in an interview that he wants to believe in a miracle. Gagandeep is a strong guy. He could have got out and is now wandering somewhere, having lost his memory. But everyone realizes that this is highly unlikely. The community's feelings were mixed: grief, shock, and hopelessness. About a week after the incident, search and rescue officials announced that the active phase of the search has been suspended. This is the standard wording used when all possible areas have been combed, witnesses have been interviewed, and resources have been exhausted with no new leads. The official communiqué noted, "We are not leaving the case closed, but we do not see the possibility of continuing the mass search in the absence of results. If new evidence or information comes to light, we are ready to resume full-scale operations." For Khalsa's family and friends, this sounded like a verdict. Everyone realized that the chances of a magical rescue were now slim to none. Police and park officials emphasized that the tragedy serves as a reminder of the real risks of crossing mountain rivers or approaching them carelessly. In terms of mystery, the events surrounding Khalsa's disappearance fit the mold of tragic stories where people disappear in the blink of an eye. However, there is no mystical halo here. It is obvious that the man fell into the river and was carried away by a strong current. However, a few points remain for the proponents of this phenomenology. Instantaneous disappearance. His friends saw him slip and that was it. In a couple of seconds, the man was gone. Lack of finds. Despite an active search, no backpack, shoes, or body was found. It was as if the river had swallowed up all traces. Great weather. The whole day was almost clear with no showers or floods. A seemingly safe environment. Theorists point to the frequency of such water disappearances in national parks, but the rational explanation is simple enough. Cold mountain water, hidden undercurrents, and dangerous bottom geomorphology. Weeks after the incident, Gagandeep Singh Khalsa's name is still in the headlines of the local press, and volunteers are still making rounds of the shores time after time. However, statistics say that if a person is not found in that time, and if there is no specific tip-off, the search is likely to come to a standstill. Relatives will have a painful way to recognize the fact of unknown absence of their dear person. At the same time, to keep hope is hindered by the understanding of the harsh truth. The water at a temperature of about 42.8 degrees Fahrenheit does not leave a chance for a long struggle, and the turbulent current reliably hides the body among underwater boulders or takes it many kilometers away. Sometimes the remains are found months later by spring fishermen or accidentally noticed by tourists, but often everything remains at the bottom of the river. On July 11, 1998, on the back slope of Mount Salfer, one of the relatively obscure slopes in the mountain range, there was a discovery that will long remain in police archives under the label unsolved. On that day, a group of climbers trying to find an alternative climbing route came across fragments of human remains. The site was off the main hiking trails, deep in the forest zone, and it was not easy to get there. Steep cliffs covered with dense spruce and fir undergrowth were of little interest to those who followed the official routes. According to one of the climbers, they noticed the remains by chance when something bright and unnatural caught their attention among the tree roots. At first they thought it might be clothes or garbage thrown by someone, but when they got closer, they saw parts of bones and almost mummified fragments of cloth. As the police, namely the officers of the district responsible for the mountainous areas, later found out, there were indeed human remains lying on the site, and in a condition indicating that the person had died at least 2 years before they were found. Forensic examination revealed that it was a male of Caucasian race, between 19 and 35 years old, about 6 feet tall. Excavations in a small area around the site yielded additional finds. Old keys to a Chrysler car manufactured in the 1970s and 1980s, with a War Amps tag hanging from the bunch, a Canadian organization that distributes keychains to return them to owners in case of loss. Other finds included a black leather wallet labeled Amity and 2 photographic cards, one of which had an illegible address in Quebec. From the beginning, police realized this was an important lead. War Amps can often help trace lost keys, and the photos and wallet theoretically offered a chance to figure out who the man was. But the situation was complicated by the time that had passed since the death. Forensic experts estimated that the remains had been there for at least 2 and possibly 3 years. This was compounded by the impact of nature. Animals could tear up some of the bones, damage the fabric of the clothes. There were almost no prints or identification marks on the remains of the skin. The car keys and War Amps tag remained a key item. Police contacted the organization to see if the keys were registered to a specific name, but it turned out that after all these years, the database did not provide a direct match. When users of the War Amps program lose keys, it is possible to get them back through a special system. But if they have not been correctly registered there, or if the owner himself has not updated the information, it is difficult to find him. In some cases, key fob numbers became inactive if the organization did not receive payment for the service. Police encountered exactly what the War Amps log or map did not give the exact ownership. Another way is to check out a 1970s to 1980s Chrysler. Several models were produced during this period, and they may have a close key format. Again, however, you need to know the specific VIN, or at least something more specific to search. There were several keys, and they may have belonged to both automobile and door locks. Law enforcement sent photos of the keys to Quebec, given that one of the photos contained an address. Perhaps a relative or the owner of the car lives there. But alas, that address was inaccurate. The photo had a half-removed street name, and the house number was illegible. A letter sent to the supposed address was returned with the notation, "Addressee unknown." As for the photographs themselves, one was black and white, apparently old, presumably from the 1970s, showing a middle-aged woman, possibly the mother, aunt, or grandmother of the unknown man. The second was in color, with a partially visible Quebec address and a young man, possibly the deceased himself, in the company of someone else in front of a car. Parts of the photo have been lost, the edges have been damaged by moisture, and the text on the back is also damaged. Apparently, the owner of these photos carefully kept them. They were in a wallet, which, although damaged by time, still retained its shape, and the inscription, Amity. The police worked out all the options. Perhaps the man came from Quebec, where he had relatives, then went to this mountainous region, and for unknown reasons died. But no missing person matching the description, 19, 35 years old, about 6 feet tall, was found in local databases. There have been some disappearances, but the dates didn't match when checked, and the Sulphur Mountain area isn't very popular with long-distance travelers. However, sometimes wildlife lovers wandered there and avoided the traditional trails. Why he ended up exactly where the remains were found is also a mystery. There was no sign of a camp, no sign of a campfire, no satellite accessories. only a couple of scraps of cloth that looked like pants and the wallet itself, which was lying in the middle of nowhere. The forensic medical report confirmed that the death could be accidental, fall, hypothermia, or other factors. Criminal behavior was not ruled out, but there were no gunshot wounds on the bones. Without soft tissue and DNA, at the time, genome analysis technology was not as advanced as it is today. The police were unable to obtain information on ethnicity other than approximate race and age. There was a high probability that it was a solitary traveler who had wandered into the back slope of the mountain and died as a result of some accident, fell off a cliff, caught in a storm, or wild animals killed. However, it was impossible to say for sure. If a missing Chrysler had been found in the area, that would have provided a lead. But nothing of the sort had been recorded. In 1998, forensic investigators were still counting on the possibility that media coverage might bear fruit. They published articles in local newspapers describing the Chrysler keys, the Amity wallet, and mentioned photos with a Quebec address. Police asked the public, "If anyone knows who these items may have belonged to, contact us." But no one responded with convincing evidence. Different people called, suggesting that the missing person was someone they knew, but matching details, height, age, time frame of disappearance, ultimately yielded no match. Moreover, the gap of 2 years or more from the date of death widened the possibilities and made the search even more uncertain. So the man's remains remained unidentified. The case is in police records under the code John Doe Sulphur Mountain. Every few years, when new methods of DNA analysis become available, there is talk of exhuming the bones and retesting them in a modern database. But in fact, the remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a local cemetery, and the bones suitable for examination were kept in an archive. If someday Canadian police decided to conduct genetic genealogy as they do in the US, maybe the story would find closure. But as of now, in the year 2025, the man's identity is still unknown. In April 2017, 22-year-old Willie Linsky from Whistler, British Columbia, suddenly decided to travel to Edmonton, as if succumbing to some impulse or plan he hadn't told his acquaintances and family about. In the quiet mountain town of Whistler, where he lived and worked seasonally, this news surprised his friends. They thought that Willie did not plan to go anywhere for a long time, at most, for a short trip on business. Nevertheless, it is known that he got on an intercity bus, left around mid-April and never contacted again. On the video from the bus station in Vancouver where the route passed, you can clearly see Willie. A young man of medium height, athletic build with a small bag on his shoulder, saying goodbye to someone on the phone, getting on a flight to Alberta. Colleagues from his former seasonal job recall that a couple days before his departure, he had talked about wanting a change and looking for something new. But it didn't seem to anyone that this might mean a drastic break with his past life. When he stopped answering calls and texts in mid-April, people close to him thought that perhaps his phone was dead or he was temporarily out of touch. As the days wore on, however, the anxiety grew. Willie was usually a sociable person, did not disappear for long periods of time unannounced, and was in the habit of informing his friends of his plans. Parents and friends started checking social networks, but the accounts were silent. They started calling Edmonton, asking if he had shown up at his friends' houses, but everyone had their hands full. A week later, when there was no word from him, one of his friends asked the Whistler police to declare Willie Linsky missing. However, the district police had no concrete leads. The guy left voluntarily, bought the ticket himself, and if he did not commit crimes, the official investigation could only record the fact disappeared from sight. By the summer of 2017, his loved ones were struggling to solve the mystery, putting up ads in Edmonton, trying to find out if he stayed somewhere in a hostel, if he took a job, but there was no sign of him. Occasionally, someone would report seeing a similar guy on a road or at a campground, but when checked, the information was either unreliable or about a different person. In the fall, Willie's parents feared the worst. He might have been involved in a criminal situation or an accident. The police, without concrete leads, handled the case more formally, periodically checking missing persons databases in the neighborhood. And so it went for a year, from April 2017 to April 2018, when few believed Willie would be found alive. But in late April 2018, something happened that simultaneously provided answers but left even more questions. Hikers hiking in the Lake Minnewanka area near the town of Banff discovered the remains of a human body far from the main trails. At first, they thought it might have been a long-standing accident, especially since the area where the bones were lying was partially covered with driftwood and snow. According to hikers, the corpse was at a point where it was difficult to wander there by accident. Hilly terrain, dense undergrowth, no popular trails nearby, and 10 miles separate the area from the town of Banff itself. When the discovery was reported to the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the investigative team immediately contacted the Alberta and British Columbia branches, cross-checking missing persons reports. Clothing and some remaining personal belongings suggested that it could be Willie Linsky. In his pants pocket, they found a passport in his name, badly damaged by moisture and time, but still legible. Preliminary examination showed no obvious signs of violent death, but due to weather conditions and animal activity, the exact condition of the remains did not tell us much. Whether it was an accident, suicide, or something else was still a mystery. The police experts who conducted the initial examination only noted that the corpse had probably been lying in the wilderness for several months to a year. The exact moment of death was difficult to determine, but the level of decomposition suggests that it happened no later than late summer 2017. How did he end up in the Banff area if he was originally traveling to Edmonton? Banff police, after making a number of inquiries, found that there was no record of any active banking or phone activity for Willie after mid-April 2017. Some fans of Missing 411 theories immediately began asking questions. Why was a man who intended to head to Edmonton 10 miles from Banff, on a secluded stretch of land near Lake Minnewanka? Did he have an automobile he could have used to get there? But friends claimed that Willie had no plans to buy a car. He usually traveled by bus. Still, maybe he made a transfer, hitchhiked, or decided to hitchhike. No one knows for sure. The cause of death remains unknown. Forensic experts found no injuries on the bones characteristic of violence, no gunshot wounds. The liver and other organs were not preserved in a condition to look for toxins or drugs. Police are not treating the case as suspicious. As a practical matter, there could have been a fall, hypothermia, or other factor. Although Banff Rangers reminded that the Lake Minnewanka area can be dangerous if not properly planned. Sudden weather changes, wild animals, difficult terrain, and remoteness from civilization. In the end, no evidence of criminal character was found. This fits quite well into the officially neutral wording. Not established, but nothing suspicious. However, the circumstances of Willie's disappearance and further route remain full of mystery. Why did he turn to these parts? Did he go to the mountains of his own volition without telling anyone? Or did he decide to see the national park at the same time, got stuck, got lost, had no money for food, got hypothermia, got injured? The versions are multiplying, none of them proved. Local newspapers reported that the Linsky family, despite their grief and sorrow, breathed a sigh of relief when they learned at least where Willie had been found. It's better to know than to guess endlessly. Later, there was a brief farewell ceremony, and the case was formally closed by the police. But in the memory of the public, the story of Willie Linsky remained a strange example. After all, the guy was clearly not going to become a solitary tourist in Alberta, disappeared in the spring, and he was found a year later in the mountains many kilometers away. Missing 411 enthusiasts point out that the day of his disappearance was clear and warm, according to the bus driver. But suddenly his fate took an unfathomable turn. Even if it is a common accident, many questions remain unanswered. How did he go there? What were his motives? Why didn't anyone see him on the way? How did no one stumble upon his body for a year, if tourists sometimes walk there in summer? After all, the official version does not give a clear explanation. And so another name is added to the list of mysterious disappearances in Canadian parks, albeit found, but with unclear circumstances of death. 3 stories, 3 fates lost forever among the wilderness of Banff National Park. Gagandeep Singh Khalsa, who disappeared in an icy river in front of his friends, the mysterious man from Mount Sulphur, whose identity has remained a mystery for decades, and Willie Linsky, whose journey was cut short in a completely unexpected place, far from the intended route. These cases remind us again how thin the line is between safety and deadly danger when it comes to the wilderness. What do you make of what's happening? An accident, a fatal mistake, or something we don't yet understand? Share your thoughts in the comments. Put likes if the video hooked you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new mystery stories and amazing investigations. Click on the bell, because ahead of us awaits a lot more mysterious and unknown. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. And remember, nature keeps more secrets than we can imagine.